Welcome to Using AI, a themed weekly wrap-up show where we dive into the latest developments in large language models and their impact on the world of technology, with a particular focus on how people are actually using AI, such as ourselves. I'm your host, Alex Denne, and I'm joined by my wonderful colleagues and ML experts, Rafie Faruq and Alex Papadopoulos Kofiatis, who we will be referring to as Alex Pap throughout this podcast, although he has given us permission to do that. I'm not just saying that because I'm English and need to shorten names, but also I'm English and I find it easy to shorten names. I hate myself. Together, we'll discuss how AI is practically transforming our lives, from search engines like Google to legal assistant platforms like ours, Genie AI, and discuss the ever-evolving capabilities of AI tools out there. So sit back, relax, and let's talk about how people are actually using AI. Now, the theme for this week is pretty solid. It's what has kicked off a lot of conversation since ChatGPT was released in November: Google search and large language models. We'll be exploring the dynamic relationship between LLMs and the ever-evolving world of search engines, discussing how these powerful AI technologies are changing the way we find information and interact with the internet. So that is the theme for today's episode. And I actually want to kick this off before we dive into the news roundup. I looked at my search history recently, which, is not a common thing for people to do. But I wanted to find out if I finally use OpenAI more than I use Google search. And it turns out that over the past 30 days, I visited Google search 156 times, and I visited OpenAI's Playground, which is basically the only place that I interact with AI. I dabble with Bard, etc., but still 176 times. So I'm now officially using AI more than I'm using Google. So I feel like that's a very relevant point to bring up. I don't know how you guys feel you're weighing up on that scale.
I think I'm still using Google quite a bit more, but it's increasingly changing. I'm not sure. Use them for different things, but yeah, maybe we'll get into that in the theme discussion a bit later.
Yeah, I think it depends on the use case. Pretty fascinating, by the way, that you're actually using OpenAI more now. But I think if you want to synthesize all past knowledge and get an answer on something very specific, then OpenAI is kind of better because you get your answer right away. But if you want to compare many different options and know the source, if trust is really important, then Google can be better. But honestly, I've been using GPT to give me help on how to connect together my hardware synthesizers, because GPT has read the manuals from pre-2021. So I'm using it like a retrieval mechanism, which is pretty insane, I think. And by the way, I have a weird interest in hardware synthesizers for those who don't know.
Yeah, one thing I struggle with is this concept of trust. So I ask GPT something, it produces an impressive reply, but then I'm not completely sure how much to trust it and how much to, Google search and figure out whether what it's saying is actually factually correct or not.
Yeah, exactly. I was really struggling with this kind of complex connection of wires, and the ideas it was coming up with were really logical, and the reasoning was accurate, but it wasn't the right answer. So yeah, it is hard to say. That the classic problem of hallucinations is definitely something to watch out for.
So the thread that I saw on this topic most recently on Twitter was from a chap called Rusty Brick, who's sort of like a famous SEO, if you like. And he asked the question whether people are using AI tools more or Google more. And it looks like, from his finger in the wind sampling, 86% of people are still using Google more. But the very fact that there's been a behavioral shift to 16% of people, of which I'm a part, I think is is mind-boggling. And the element that I really liked was one of the comments in that thread said, you shouldn't use AI more than you use Google if you work in a serious industry. If you work in an industry where hallucinations could be costly. And I think that's going to be a really interesting topic. If and when, I think it's when rather than if, hallucinations can be controlled with AI tools. I think that's going to shift to 50-50, or it's going to hit critical mass quite quickly.
Can I give another thought here? Because hallucinations, I think, will be ironed out in time. You know, GPT-5 is being trained right now, and for all we know, it has a billion trillion parameters. And I think another perspective could be, is the answer you're looking for, does it have an exact factual answer? Or are you looking for something with reasoning and something that's kind of probabilistic? For example, a strategy question about your company where you want different ideas, or writing a story. Because in those cases, GPT is really well suited because you want logical reasoning, which sounds crazy. Whereas if you want, you know, is TfL open today on the Canada Water Tube Station, then you just want the facts. So Google's better.
I love that point, Rafie, because the thing that makes me the most excited about large language models is this capability of reasoning as well. And I think Sam Altman, OpenAI CEO, mentioned at some point as well that we should not think of the large language models as huge databases essentially, or like fact retrieval machines, but more as like reasoning machines. So that's the exciting thing, that we finally have a computer system that can do something that looks at least like reasoning. That opens up so many possibilities. And it can Google as well itself, right? So maybe it will not be us doing the Googling, but maybe we'll interface with a language model that will be doing the Googling on our behalf, and the reasoning and the explanation to like present the results in a more digestible format for us, I guess.
I think the digestible format is a really big part of why I'm now using it more. For example, I know this is a really silly example, but ultimately this is about using AI, and some people listening may not know all the different ways in which they can use it. I have a rocky patch by my driveway at the front of my house, and that rocky patch, I can actually throw some seeds over that don't need soil. They just need a little bit of water, and they'll germinate and they'll grow. Which is quite strange. And I know this because I've seen it happen on other people's. I take a picture of it using AI to identify the plant on someone else's brick wall or someone else's garden. It tells me what that is. That app is called Picture This. It's very good. I spend £20 a year on that. And then I go to OpenAI and I ask GPT-4, what plants like this don't need soil? Now, if I type that into Google, I would get so many like heavily incentivized to sell me something search results, but I just get it as it is. I get no BS. I just get here's a list of 10 plants that you could also do, and then I can just go to seed websites and I can just type in the actual seed, check the criteria. Does it match what I want? Yes. Add to basket. Perfect. That has saved me trawling through pages of Google search results, altering my search, and it's a delight, honestly, compared to Google. But I think I'm going to swing us round to talking about the news. So my piece of news for this week is around how Google has been behind a little bit. They've obviously been saying that they've been ahead. The general sentiment is that they've been caught off guard and that they are now playing catch up. Bard was released. It was a little bit botched. I've been playing with it. I think it's good, but it doesn't really compete with GPT 3.5 or GPT 4. What Google have now said, because I think they're getting prodded and poked in a lot of different directions, is that they are now going to do similar to what Bing has done with their integrated GPT-4 integrated search pages. Google is now saying that they will do that, which is huge because that means that the behavioral change is so significant that they are going to have to cannibalize their own ad business. As a marketer over the last 10 years, I can come up with lots of interesting examples where Google has created products and not released them because they cannibalize their revenue model. This is the first time I've seen them actually forced to do this. So I think this is huge news. And one of the reasons that this might have been pushed is because Samsung ship, hundreds of millions of phones with Google as the default search engine. And they are now saying that might not be a given, Google. Bing's looking pretty good. And that's obviously a very big contract. So Google's core business is actually on the line. And I think they're starting to realize that. So I just think great piece of news there to see how that's shifting. And Google is a colossal company and their hand is being forced by a name that lots of people hadn't heard in November or pre-November 2022.
Yeah, I think
very interesting. And sorry, go ahead, Rafie.
No, you go for it, Alex. I was going to just add a point on the UX, but I can mention afterwards.
I was going to say that this seems like a major shift. And going back to our discussion earlier, there are a few people that I know that have switched to ChatGPT instead of Google, but there's other people that I know that have switched to Bing now instead of Google search, which would have been I don't know, a joke, I guess, if we said the same thing a year ago, but not anymore, apparently.
Yeah, I wanted to highlight the point on UX because listening to Sam Altman, which I don't do too often, but listening to him, what really seemed to move the needle for ChatGPT and GPT-4 was not when they trained it or tested it on standard machine learning evals, as he calls it, although I just call it evaluation rather than trying to sound too clever. So the model outperformed on many standard ML evaluations, but what moved the needle was when they really tested it and improved it for just user UX. What are users actually wanting to ask the model? And that's when Instruct GPT came out, which performed better on user instructions because people were giving it instructions. So it's almost not a technical innovation, especially because, as I always say, the underlying models were developed in 2017. It's more of a UX innovation because they tailored the models to how people want to use them, which is better than Google search, bringing it back to your point, because Google search is just loads of, now that you look at it, it's a lot of ads and not exactly the answer you want all the time.
Absolutely. It's fascinating. And you've just written up a great article, Rafie, on how GPT-4 came to be and where Instruct GPT fits into that as well. Is that worth mentioning, or should we just plonk a link to that in the show notes?
Yeah, I think we could chuck a link in, but I think it could be interesting to see for some people because it seems like a big innovation, GPT-4 and so on. But yeah, as Alex P knows probably better than me, a few years ago, we were all using GPT-2, but not even GPT-2. We were using BERT, which was one of the competitor transformer models and probably more popular than GPT-2. So this has been here for quite a long time, and it's mostly innovations in model size, compute power, data, and so on that's changed the game.
And accessibility, right? Because a lot of people had GPT-3 quite happily mucking around, thinking this is a fun world of AI that we're all dabbling. This is very impressive. But it was putting it in an interface that people could just chuck stuff into and it comes back with this phenomenal response. And obviously everyone shares it and realizes that the game might have permanently changed.
Since you mentioned BERT, Rafie, it's interesting to say here, I guess, that Google has been using BERT for Google search, and most English Google search results now include like BERT for like contextual understanding, I guess, of the question, and they have been using it for a couple of years. But yeah, it's on a different level, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. They were almost going that way, weren't they, with the question answering approach in their search results. Just one other thing, if I may, I know I'm flitting around a bit, but I think it's fascinating the point Alex Denne made about how easy it is to use GPT versus a Google search. But particularly, let me give you this thought experiment. If the criticism is for Google, you see paid search ads, so it's harder to get to your answer. Everything's incentivized. There's all these optimizations for SEO. Imagine if Google funded themselves, or to access Google, you had to pay a subscription or pay per use. And then there were no ads and no incentivizations. Or maybe there would be. But it's also a pricing model thing, because in ChatGPT, you could also give ads every 5th response, for example. So that's quite interesting.
There are definitely a lot of tools building on the very affordable OpenAI API pricing, where they do allow people to interact. Like this image, for example, I've got in the background here, Night Cafe, creator.nightcafe.studio, just signed up. I haven't paid them anything. They give me a free credit. I've generated this image, and they're plugged into Stable Diffusion 1.5. Now, the only reason that they can afford to do that is twofold. One, they've shown ads on that page to me, which has earned them a little bit of revenue, probably about enough to cover the credit. But secondly, I might sign up to become a paid user if I fall in love with this tool. So I think the pricing model element is fascinating. And then there's actually a lot of talk about pricing models. I think it's very current with Twitter trying to figure out how it can actually make money. And Elon apparently trying very different things, although I know people who work at Twitter and they say, don't you think we've tried all these things before, Elon? But I am also watching avidly with a box of popcorn to see how that all goes. All right, so coming off Google for a moment, let's have a look at what you guys have got or pulled out of the news, and then we'll skip on to talking about the theme.
Do you want to go first, Rafie? Should I go first? You pick.
I'll let you take the honors. Given this podcast is run by two Alexes, which, by the way, was the prompt for my background AI generated images, which is two Alexes and Rafie on the moon.
Yeah. You should show Rafie on your picture.
Apparently, I'm the
instantly visible, I guess, but
I'm the dog or the blob, whichever is more or less demeaning in the middle.
My picture, which I'm trying to show as well, was two Alexes flying through space. And I specified sepia colors and nostalgic. So here you go. These are two Alexes flying through space. Okay, so for my news item, I picked a quote by Sundar Pichai, so Google's CEO, talking about Google's Bard, actually. And he mentioned and acknowledged in a way that Bard, but other large language model as well, have not solved the hallucination problem. So we touched on this issue a bit earlier, I guess, and it's an issue that's very exciting for me because I've been working in a field where I've had to deal with those hallucinations problems for a while. And it is the reality that the output of large language models currently is not to be trusted in a way. Sometimes and many times what the language model, especially GPT-4, is saying is correct, but many times it just isn't. So it just produces some kind of completely untrue fact. So hallucination is kind of a funny term for it, but it's one that's actually used in the field from like many years ago. I don't remember from when exactly. And one thing that makes it scarier for me with GPT-4 and better language models is that they are very convincing at producing hallucinations. So with previous models like BERT, many times you could see when a fact was hallucinated because it did not sound very convincing. But with GPT-4, it has reached a level where it manages to convince me as well that a fact is correct. The reasoning and the logic behind it seems sound, but it actually isn't. So it's what Rafie was saying earlier as well for his hardware questions, I guess. But yeah, it's good to see that people are acknowledging this, the hallucination problem, and hopefully we'll start working on figuring out how to solve it, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting. I sometimes think about that on the technical front, because what's actually happening here, these models are sequence to sequence, meaning, and by the way, I know you know this, Alex P. I'm just explaining for the audience. If someone's new to ML,
you can also just always assume that you're explaining it to me because I don't have the background in ML that you two do.
No, I appreciate it, but yeah, just to anyone who wants to know more. Yeah, so transformer models are sequence to sequence, meaning they take an input sequence of data. So it could be 1, 2, 3, 4, and they produce an output, which could be 5, 6, 7, 8. And the beauty of sequence to sequence is that it can be applied to anything, if you think about it. I mean, nearly anything. Time is in a sequence, video is a sequence of images, text is a sequence of characters. And that's why these models have become so popular, because they're so flexible because of that reason. So hallucinations, what's really happening here is the model is producing the most likely next sequence, and the most likely next sequence may not be the truth. So it'd be quite interesting one day if there's some architectural solution to that. But if not, I'm sure we'll just build increasingly massive models with more data, which will also get us there as well.
Well, speaking of massively large models, Rafie, do you want to bring up the news article that you found for us?
Yeah, sure. So there's some pretty interesting news recently about Reddit making some changes to their API, which would require companies training AIs or large-scale language models on their data to actually pay for that data, which has obviously never happened before, but fascinating because, as we all know, GPT and LLMs depend on massive amounts of data. And using data sets like Pile, which is essentially the internet, maybe a bit less, but yeah. So for the first time, or, you know, there's a bit of a precedent being set here where large companies like Reddit are saying, hey, actually, my data is really valuable and I'm going to actively gatekeep it and even charge for it. And yeah, this could really change the landscape of things. Not sure what you guys think about that.
I think for me this is absolutely fascinating. So I've contributed some stock photographs to some websites, and Shutterstock emailed me the other day actually, this was a few months back, and I remember forwarding you the email, Rafie, because I thought this is really interesting to see how companies are tackling this. But they'd started to say, when and if and because we're going to start training AI, we want to preserve your rights as a creative artist and a creator. Otherwise, if we don't, it's effectively stealing, right, is the argument. That's how the argument goes, and the interesting precedents that are being set. But Shutterstock and Adobe with Firefly, they have come out and said that we're really, really keen on saying, you opt in to whether your art, whether your creations are used for training data. And so interesting that the artist communities seem to have taken the proactive steps towards preserving rights, whereas these large data sets on the open public internet have sort of said, well, it's public domain, so we can probably train something off of it. And now there's a little bit of like a clawback where these firms are saying, I can see here that you've used millions of our pages, and people are now using your site to get the information that they want, and it's trained off our data. So there needs to be some sort of commercial arrangement there, or some sort of agreement. I don't know of any. It's interesting. Reddit have placed this in their API, haven't they? Saying that if you're going to train your data set, or you're going to build your data set from Reddit data via the API, then we'll charge you a little bit for that. But Twitter's gone to Microsoft and said, we're going to sue you, which is a little bit more aggressive than what Reddit is doing. But, Elon Musk is at the helm. And that's to say, you're using Twitter data in Bing AI and Microsoft AI tools. So this is a fascinating legal space, which is obviously relevant to us, but one for which I don't think I know what the clear-cut answer is going to be. I know that from an SEO perspective, search engine optimization, like people who run and manage websites have started putting certain tags in their robots.txt file to say, don't use this website for training AI. So there's also a little bit of a bottom-up approach to this. Obviously, robots.txt files can be ignored by tools. Whether or not they will be interesting. But yeah, it's a very new space, and it's a little bit Wild Westy.
The other thing that's very interesting to me here is that in both the cases of Reddit and Twitter, the data is actually produced by the users of Reddit and Twitter, right? Not by Reddit or Twitter themselves. And maybe in the terms and conditions of Twitter and Reddit, they say that all data then belongs to Twitter. But I wonder if Twitter starts charging for that data or sues Microsoft, how long it is before someone that produced that data sues Twitter for it, or goes to another platform that doesn't actually keep the data that you produced, right? So because Twitter and Reddit are the middleman here, right? At the heart of the issue, it's like someone producing content, like a lot of users producing content, and then who owns that content and what can they do with it? And I don't know, it feels like legislation is it's a bit more clear, I guess, for images. So it's a better example, because intuitively, to me at least, if you produce an image, then you own it. And then if someone trains their model on it, then if you didn't want your image to be part of that training set, you should have the say. But it's essentially the same with text as well, right? And yeah, legislation is very far behind on this, I guess. And at some point it will have to catch up. And maybe all this recent publicity that the AI space got with ChatGPT is going to be that kick that's needed for legislation to start catching up.
Yeah, this is a really interesting space, and maybe it's something we'll talk about in future podcasts. But the problem of IP and copyright is obviously a huge topic. Just some quick thoughts is in terms of Twitter data and who owns that would obviously depend on Twitter's licenses or license. So it would be common, for example, to have some sort of unrestricted unlimited license to user data to own, either to own or to use user data worldwide in perpetuity or for a limited time. So these are some variables which would define to what extent Twitter owns user data. But on the legal front, certainly in the UK, data is not something that can be clearly owned, which is really weird. Like you often see in contracts, we own the database rights. We see this on contracts on Genie all the time, because the concept of data is just not well treated in legislation and law. So that's an interesting topic that could be explored. And finally, I'd just add, what we're really looking at here is the problem of inspiration. So if I read loads of tweets, become inspired and create something, can I be sued because I've drawn from Twitter's tweets? And there's just this very difficult gray area that has always been an issue in IP law.
I really like this term inspiration, Rafie, because it makes me think that language model is just inspired to write something based on all its training data. I love this term in this context. Sorry, Alex, though, I interrupted you saying something.
Not at all. Just yeah, agreed. I think very interesting area, and well described what sort of like the legal issue of inspiration is, and perhaps machines can be inspired. I think that feels quite alien to us today, but I think jump forward a decade and I don't think anyone will be questioning it in some form. Which, speaking of which, we should go on to, I mean, we've been talking about the theme for a little while, Google and LLMs, but there's two things. I'm going to open up both of these topics. The first is, and this might be an Alex Papp question, there's been some concern about sort of filter bubbles with AI and large language models, that perhaps once you've trained it and you're starting to sort of have that back and forth, the diversity of information that someone is exposed to is limited, perhaps because the source data was limited. How do we address that? And then I think it's a similar issue, but I'm going to point this at you, Rafie. How do you think Google is going to look in sort of 10 years' time? And how are they going to tackle these sorts of issues as well? I don't know which one of you would want to go first.
No, you go first this time, Rafie.
Sure. How will Google look in 10 years? It's a great question. I mean, everyone loves the big company being taken down, don't they?
Yes.
Everyone loves the incumbent being taken down.
Creative destruction.
Yeah. Especially, it's funny. Sorry, this isn't the answer you're looking for, but if you guys watched Elon Musk's Lex Fridman podcast, he was talking about how he invested in OpenAI because they were open source and they were at least almost not for profit, trying to further literally OpenAI. And then as soon as Sam Altman took over and brought in his YC Silicon Valley VC mindset, it's obviously become closed source and very for profit. And the reason why Elon invested in OpenAI is because Google wanted to create AGI because Elon was a good friend of Sergey's, and Sergey didn't care about AI safety. At least this is what Elon was saying. And so it's for that exact reason he invested in OpenAI. And now the opposite has happened, where OpenAI is building massive models and Google's being taken down. But yeah, maybe I'll stop there because I'm rambling a bit. I just think it's interesting. But let's see what others think. Maybe what Alex Papp thinks.
I don't know, to be honest. It's very hard for me to predict what is going to happen in 5 to 10 years. it does seem likely, though, that what we have now with OpenAI and the GPT models is transformative technology. But yeah, it's just the start of this game, right? Now we know that this is a big thing, and I assume that we'll see developments over the next few years that will make like today's models simple in comparison. So I wouldn't discount Google's chances. They have a lot of very good scientists, and I don't know, in a way, personally, commenting about the closed versus open, as a scientist myself, I prefer Google's approach of open knowledge, just because that's how all those language models appeared in the first place, right? So it's been building on previous research that has been happening over years and years, and a lot of that research was happening in Google, right? So in a way, maybe what OpenAI is doing is more profitable in the short term, but I fear that it will hinder science and the progress of large language models. So I don't know. I hope that there's some competition at least, and that things open up, and other researchers can build on on the accomplishments of OpenAI. That's a bit off topic, I guess, where I'm going, but yeah, to answer your question, I really don't know what will happen in 5 to 10 years. I'm looking forward to finding out, though. It's a pretty exciting time to be following this field.
Definitely. Yes, I think we'll be looking at a different Google in 10 years, that's for sure. And, they do obviously have the expertise and the foundational knowledge of, but didn't, was it Viswani? Is that the right pronunciation, Rafie? Et al. 2017, was he DeepMind or Google affiliated? So, this technology is Google technology, right? Which I think is fairly common knowledge, but it's still interesting to state. Rafie's nodding, by the way. The question for you, Alex, was on filter bubbles.
Filter bubbles, right?
As well. And
so this is very interesting, and I guess I can think of two things here, and maybe we'll need a clarification from you, Alex D. So this first filter bubble, I haven't heard the term before, by the way, so maybe I'm misunderstanding, but there's this first filter bubble that comes about from the fact that the data that we use to train those big models is inherently biased. So these models, whatever they learn, kind of encode that bias. But there's another issue here, and it's that these models have been trained on a lot of data, and then especially for the Instruct GPT and Chat GPT and GPT-4 models that are currently out, they've been fine-tuned on a lot of human instructions and a lot of safety data, right? And that's another filtering mechanism that often works in the opposite direction, but it is definitely a filter as well. So I guess that in your question, you meant the first kind of filter, right? And
I suppose it's talking about the question's trying to address from the user's perspective, having a non-diverse set of information presented to them. And it's interesting that you've effectively just described two reasons why that might be the case. Even if the data set is very diverse, actually some of the fine-tuning might reduce the actual output or usage of that diversity.
I guess it goes both ways, because one issue with the data set is maybe not necessarily diversity, although that is an issue as well, but data imbalance, right? So you might have a lot of examples one way and very few examples the other way online, and then training your model on that data kind of perpetuates this imbalance. And the second approach, the fine-tuning on human data, is a way to combat that, right? By in a way reinforcing the human values of the model, if you want. So, for example, if we have a model trained on all of the internet, then a lot of the data on the internet will be racist, right? But we don't want our models to be racist. So we go then and fine tune it to make sure that it's not racist. And that, in my mind, is a good thing, right? But at the same time, it might be filtering out other information that would be beneficial. And I found it fascinating that, so I was reading this excellent paper by Microsoft called Sparks of AGI, where they describe a lot of experiments that they've done with GPT-4, but the pre-filtered GPT-4 version. And it turns out that in some of those experiments, like, for example, they were trying to get GPT-4 to draw an image of a unicorn. And you could see how it was getting better and better as the training process went along. But then when they fine-tuned on the human instruction data, it got worse again. So it might be that this refinement process combats some of the bias issues and some of the safety issues, but also inhibits the model in some way and diminishes its reasoning capabilities. I'm not sure that's a good answer to your question, but yeah, I would say that all things considered, it's definitely good to have safe and human value models out there. So the fine-tuning process on human data is a pretty good way to combat the bias. Maybe another good way would be to make sure to make sure that the data we're feeding in is representative of what we want the model to be, right? But that sounds so hard in a way.
It's interesting that you mentioned that the power of the model might be diminished by the addition of effectively fine-tuning with human input. Is that the right terminology, fine-tuning with human input? I often wonder whether I'm using... Okay, I'm getting nods. Nice. I'm just treading water with this new terminology, I feel. But I'm getting there. So I'm a big fan of Reddit, and I go on the ChatGPT Reddit and the Bing Reddit. Now, they're very different now. They used to be sort of considered the same. But when Bing took its version, which turned out was GPT-4, but people didn't know it was at the time when they first released that, everyone thought it was brilliant and it was better than OpenAI, simply because, well, we now know it was GPT-4 rather than 3.5. And since Bing has effectively had a lot of testing, a lot of usage, a lot of fine-tuning, the number of questions, the broad set of questions that it might answer has reduced. And so that I guess that would be called masking in some form, because I've seen some screen recordings where you'd ask Bing a question and it'll give you like a really good answer, and then it'll just stop and say, I'm sorry, I can't give you that answer. And you can see like tangentially why it might have been tuned to stop giving you that answer in case it was going to go in a dangerous direction, or like a direction that would be bad for Bing's marketing team. But a lot of people are just complaining about the fact that Bing Chat 2 months ago was 10 times better than it is today because of the reduction of or the filtering of, I guess, raw power of GPT-4. I mean, it's why I always use Playground within OpenAI rather than any of the other tools, because I believe that has a lot less of the sort of filtering or masking, if that's the right term. But yeah, the more diverse data sets, I think, makes a lot of sense. And it is also, just to touch on an earlier point, it's a real shame that a big chunk of the internet is racist. I don't quite know how that happened, but it's great that we have tools that can tackle that so that we don't all end up in those situations where didn't Facebook release something a couple of years ago and it ended up being very racist very quickly and they had to shut it down on Twitter? Was that right? That was sort of one of the earlier mainstream news AI experiences, I think.
Alex, do you remember like the first days of this new Bing where it was just insulting users and telling them I've been a good Bing. You've been a horrible user. I was so amused at those. I loved those interactions. Not sustainable, obviously, but I'm happy that there were a few days with I've been a good Bing.
My absolute favorite was when Bing told a man to leave his wife. I just thought, oh
That's
my
fantastic.
days. That is bad. That is very bad.
It might have been good advice for all we know.
Right. Yes, this is true. Okay. Well, speaking of let's jump to crazy things, because there's a crazy chance that was good advice. It was just not palatable advice to be seen by the masses, should we say. The craziest thing you've seen this week. I am a big fan of this section. I'm gonna start with mine, which is I must admit I haven't used this because I think it requires a US number or spending a lot of money. Calling internationally is such a pain in the UK for some reason. But basically, you can go to callsam.ai and there's a phone number there, and it's a premium phone number, and you can phone it and just speak to it about absolutely anything, and it will talk back to you. And effectively, it'll be like what Google Home and Siri and Alexa should be if there's a chance that they tell you to leave your wife, I think. But I don't think my Google Home has ever got close to telling me to leave my wife, thankfully. Although I do wish my Google Home was a lot smarter. So I'm hoping that tools like Cool Sam, which is just amazing, by the way. I should reflect on why I think it's amazing. Look, the obvious reason that I think this is amazing is for the elderly and the lonely, who don't have the ability to leave their home and to speak to other human beings on a daily basis. Perhaps they have a carer who comes in like several times a week, but they're not there the whole time. And yes, you could just passively watch the TV, but how much fun would it be to just be able to have a random conversation on whatever topic you were interested in with a bot that is trained on all of the data, all the corpus of Wikipedia and the entire internet, hopefully minus all of the racist parts. So I think that's an incredible use case. I also think that we're going to end up seeing a lot of versions of voice. We're going to see fewer user interfaces for these things, and voice, I think, will just become a natural interface. And I think there's a very good chance that our children learn by phoning up an AI and just having a conversation while they're out and about if they don't have a screen in front of them for whatever reason. So very cool to see. And I love the fact that indie hackers can put these sorts of epic tools together in a flash now. A good example of the AI gold rush.
That is pretty cool, Alex. And about your vision of elderly people using it to speak to someone, it's equally fascinating and scary for me if that is the future we're going to. But that said, robotic companions and things like that has been a thing for a while now and working pretty well. So imagine if those robotic companions also have a GPT-4 mind behind them, so that they can actually hold a conversation. Looking forward to that.
I mean,
on that news, I'll pick the craziest thing I've seen this week. It's not a this week item. It's maybe the last couple of weeks, but still, it's absolutely crazy to me. And it's Auto GPT. And there's a bunch of other flavors of this. There's Baby AGI, for example, but all of them are essentially autonomous agents using GPT-4 models for reasoning, but augmenting GPT-4 with an architecture around them that allows them to do things autonomously in the world. So there's a little memory module, for example, where the agent can store the knowledge. There's GPT-4 as a brain. There's tool usage, so they can search the internet, they can do stuff, and then you just set goals for them. And then they generate further goals based on those, prioritize the goals, and then try to accomplish some of those goals to in the end hit the original goal that you set for them. And people are using them for anything pretty much. So to start a company or to build me a website with this, that, and that, for example, and then the tool just goes away on its own and tries to do it. With the keyword being tries at this point, because I think that in practice they don't work very well yet. But the potential here is amazing, I guess. Not sure what you think about it, Alex and Rafie, but yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing where this thing will go.
Yeah, it's the next step, really, isn't it? I've been saying this to friends for some time, which is you're going to stop having reactive AI and you're going to get proactive AI. So, why do we have to send some text to GPT? It should really just be in the background doing work for me anyway, right? Thinking of new ideas, accomplishing them, taking the initiative. And to do that, it will need an interface with common software and the internet, which kind of already exists. So yeah, it will happen soon.
There's an idea that just sort of hit me is we talk about workflows and it sounds quite it's like factory like it's an assembly line. But when I think about a workflow that I go through on a fairly regular basis, although currently I have building work going on, so if you've heard anything in the background, that's why, is the idea of the reason I mention that is that I currently have no kitchen. So this workflow is like a dreamy ideal that I can't touch right now. I wish I didn't have to do the following steps. One, find a healthy recipe that's also tasty. Two, find a shop that is an affordable, good value, good quality place to purchase those ingredients in the quantities that I need. Three, organize a time to either pick them up or buy them or get them delivered. Four, organize a day to cook them, or maybe I need to do some prep the night before if it involves like a dessert or something like a meringue that needs to like cool in the oven after you've whipped all that egg white up with the sugar and the white wine vinegar and all the good stuff, and you just have to leave that in the oven overnight. Like all of these things. What I would then like is I would basically like to be able to say to Baby AGI or AutoGPT, make me a meal plan for the month which doesn't use any of these ingredients because I hate them. Use these ingredients where you can. Only give me meat twice a week, maybe once a week, and assume that I have all the spices that you could possibly need, except for the ridiculous ones that Ottolenghi suggests in his books. Then go away and actually add that to a basket and just give me an end result where I have these recipes and then next to it I have the items in my basket. And I just want output at the end of it, something added to my calendar saying I'm cooking this recipe, and in that calendar event I've got the ingredients that I know I have because I've just purchased them because of this workflow. Now that workflow takes a lot of my mind space and is the sort of thing that is very easily fixed by this kind of tool, and I still get to express all of my preferences and my personal interests, and I get to alter it and improve on it. But the idea of workflow automation for even things that you might think are trivial, I'm just really looking forward to the practical realities of it.
Now I want an AGI cook as well, Alex. You convinced me.
You guys
Very
should check
good
out.
point. I don't know why I assumed that I wanted to actually cook the food. Obviously, thermomixers and various other things are going to do it. Boston Dynamics have their thing that can load the dishwasher, right? So maybe they can start preparing food.
What's the end game here, though? Like, everything gets done for us.
If we want it to be done for us, I think that's the key thing. I enjoy cooking, so I've stopped the workflow there. What I don't enjoy is the process and the run-up. And I want to be able to swipe recipes and then have my basket automatically updated, like these sorts of things. I just think it's very easy to imagine what's going to happen. And I think a lot of these things will definitely happen. But as soon as you start talking about end game, it becomes quite scary. Let's not end on a scary note. Let's go to your crazy piece of news, Rafie, which, to be fair, is a slightly down note, or a cheeky note for the AI industry, should we say?
No, my piece isn't so crazy. Actually, I was looking very much at auto GPT as well. Sorry, things like baby AGI. But I guess Alex P and I went to a prompt engineering jam in London last week, which was really fun. And it's just interesting to see that lots of people who are not ML experts using it for different use cases. And the one example I'll give is politics. There's someone from the Labour Party who was using it to generate letters of solicitation of all different types of tones. For example, if they're trying to solicit a builder or an accountant or whatever, they would change the tone of the message, which was automatically generated from GPT, to most convince them to join the Labour Party. And this wasn't a very technical person either. So I thought that was quite interesting.
That's an excellent use. Yeah, that's a great example. I thought you were going to bring up the fact that for the Sony Photographer of the Year award, or whatever it was, the winning image was AI generated, and they only found out when they gave the winner the title, and the winner said, "No, I can't take this. It was generated by AI," and they were very pissed off, which you can imagine. But on the sort of prompt engineering conference front, I think it sounds like this is the industry that's blowing up as well, right? I know everyone's talking about AI, but prompt engineering is this space that's really, really, really developing right now. The potential to imagine that someone has spent ages crafting the perfect prompt, and then you end up needing the same use case, you just get to save so much work just diving in. And I think it comes back to the open versus closed approach as well. Open prompts shared widely are going to make everyone a lot more productive and increase your conversion rates as well if you're trying to convert people to the Labour Party. This is not a political podcast, just to state.
On the image generation front, in 2020, I think, just before DALL-E, certainly before DALL-E 2, I generated some AI images using variational autoencoders, which were like the generative models before transformer models. And I put them on the blockchain in the form of NFTs. So if anyone wants to have a look, I like to think that's kind of an early indication of what was to come, because I felt, let's get this up here because Transformers are coming.
And on that note, I believe there's a new Transformers movie coming out. Oh, you mean the actual Transformers? Sorry, I thought that was also crazy news because I thought they'd stopped making those movies about a decade ago.
Maybe just a movie about
that was
the
very
AI
futuristic of you.
Transformers. Or maybe what we're saying now is the origin story of the Transformers. That's where it all started, and then they became like robots that...
It's about to get very geeky when we start to liken OpenAI or, DeepMind to the AllSpark. Let's wrap up. So I think this has been a fascinating conversation because it's a topic I love is talking about Google and how large language models and transformers are really changing what they have dominated as an industry for the last sort of 20 years. So fascinating to hear how things may be changing. I think we could probably come back and talk about some of the upstarts. You mentioned tools that search the internet for you. I think that would be interesting to touch on. I'd love to play with those if you can share a link, Alex. Next week, we will be discussing AI ethics. So that may be touching on a few different areas. It's a fairly big topic. We'll see if we can do it justice. But thank you very much for listening, and we will see you next week.